Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing a Ryzen 5 1400 paired with a GTX 1060 6GB. As you can see there, 3.2 GHz, 4 cores, 8 threads, and the RAM running at 2934 MHz, HyperX Savage DDr4 kit. And I'll be testing 14 games of this build. For more details on Ryzen and RAM frequency, check the links down in the description. And this is with the latest BIOS of this motherboard. So first we got Battlefield 1. I'm going to be doing 1080p with the settings you see on screen. DirectX 11 since DirectX 12 is a stuttery mess. Unlock frame rates, and then on the settings I kept GPU memory restriction on off, and I used the Ultra preset, so this is the highest it can go. And I'm going into a 64 player match. As you can see on the bottom left corner of the video, there's a graph that's for the frame times, so you can know what's going on with the performance of the game, so you have more of an idea on how consistent the game is. I had a lot of performance issues on this map, especially on the CPU side. That's why I tested this one in particular. And so far, after some updates, the game seems to be running worse, since I was getting better performance back then, when Ryzen 5 was just released, so I'm not sure what's going on, why the frame times tend to be so variable here. But still playable. I recommend capping the game at 60 frames per second.
First aid for you. You got damage? I'll fix you up. I can fix your wounds. Are you hurt? I'll patch you up. Use that first aid. You want those wounds patched?
GTA 5, I'll be doing 1080p using a mix between high and very high. Shadows will be on high, since that allows me to get 60 frames per second more consistently. Then on the advanced graphics I use long shadows and high detail streaming while flying. And you'll see at the beginning of the video that I'll be just flying with a helicopter. That's a bigger hit to the CPU so far when I tested this game. Then I'll just go into the middle of two big streets and start exploding cars and all that kind of stuff. A lot of particles, the police chasing me, all that kind of stuff. That was pretty much my idea here. Most of the problems are when there are many cars on fire, plus explosions in the background. So if you're going on a rampage in this game, just remember that. You might drop to 60 frames per second, but I didn't see many drops below that. The lowest I saw was like 58 frames, so not bad at all. And while flying through the map or moving on a car very quickly, I didn't see any drops below 60 frames per second. But yeah, so far a totally playable experience. The Witcher 3, I'll be doing 1080p once again, and on the settings I'll be using a mix between high and ultra. I'll be lowering grass density and foliage visibility range from ultra to high, And then on the post-processing options, I only lowered ambient occlusion from HBAO Plus to SSAO and turned off chromatic aberration, since I think it's a very annoying effect. And I'll be just going on horseback to Novigrad, since that's pretty much the city that gave me more problems on the CPU side. But if you're in the swamps, it could be a bigger hit to the GPU. So I prefer to test it on a place that uses both components as much as possible. So the swamps don't use much CPU but use a lot of GPU, and Novigrad uses a lot of both, especially in the middle of the city. You might get a couple drops below 60 frames per second, but so far if you don't have stutters here, you won't have them on the forest.
No loitering round here.
Right, what a freak.
Hey!
Help! Save me! I'm dying of poverty.
Whosoever conceals a mate in their home shall burn alongside
Fallout 4, I'll be doing 1080p with FXAA, since TAA looks worse. In my opinion, it looks blurrier. I lowered the shadow distance from ultra to high. I also lowered God rays from ultra to low, since I saw little performance improvement with those lowered. So I'll be just in Diamond City, in the tallest part of the city, just looking downwards. So we got all the detail crammed there. You'll see that it drops below 60 frames per second quite a lot while looking far into the distance. So yeah, this game is not running that good on AMD CPUs, but we're still over 30 frames per second, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Just cap it at 40 and hope for the best.
Who needs a haircut? Everyone needs a haircut.
Move along.
Hey, swatter, 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 swatter! Swing, swatter!
The hub of trade for all Diamond City right here.
Vintage!
Oh my god.
HITMAN, I'll be doing 1080p with RTX 12 since I got better performance there. I lowered the level of detail to high, and I also lowered shadow resolution and shadow maps to medium, and that allowed me to be over 40 frames per second, but I'm still below 60 pretty much all the time. You can see that the GPU usage is quite low, it's below 80%. So the issue here should be the CPU, but I have trouble on this level even with an i7-4790 to get 60 frames per second. There are a lot of NPCs, a lot of transparencies, there's a lot going on in this level. So if you're playing a different level, you shouldn't have that much of an issue getting 60s.
How you doing?
I could just about strangle you. Stomach trip. Shellfish from a buffet. This heat.
Overwatch, I'll be doing 1080p with the maximum settings, everything cranked up to the max. Of course, after changing the settings I restarted the game, and in the middle of the Overwatch footage I'll just turn off reflections, so you can see that we can get pretty much 120 frames per second and higher. But some people that wanted to buy 120Hz monitors asked me on previous videos if I was able to get 120, and yes you can. If you lower just reflections you'll be fine, but if you want even higher frame rates, just lower the rest of the stuff to high and restart the game, and that should do. But yeah, no problems with this game whatsoever.
Heroes never die. Where does it hurt? Oh, defense.
I have spotted the enemy.
Healing stream engaged.
Graviton surge is ready.
Understood.
Protect the objective. Helden sterben nicht. Your support has arrived.
Batman Arkham Knight, I'll be doing 1080p with the highest setting except chromatic aberration and film grain. Those will be turned off since I don't like how they look and they don't affect performance. And I'll also be turning off all the NVIDIA GameWorks features since those don't usually run that well. And well, you'll see me in the middle of the city, in the place that I had the most performance issues at. I'll be fighting some people, then I'll just get into the Batmobile. I'll be trying to drive as fast as I can, destroying stuff in the way, and then I'll just eject from the Batmobile and fly a little bit. So the game has to load assets faster and all that kind of stuff. And you'll see that the game has some stutters every now and then, but so far it's a totally playable experience. It's annoying when the game stutters, especially when you're moving fast through the map. It's not as bad as day one, but it still needs work. I'm 100% sure that they won't fix it at this point in time, which is kind of disappointing since the game is a lot of fun. Yes, it's still playable, but I wouldn't expect 60 frames per second consistent. As you can see in the gameplay, it stutters quite a lot. The game left 1.2 gigabytes unused, so it doesn't seem to be a RAM issue.
This ain't the time to lose focus. We regroup and head back hard.
Assassin's Creed Unity, I'll be doing 1080p with a mix between high and very high. The environment quality will be lowered to high, the textures will be on the max, shadows won't be on the max since that's a NVIDIA GameWorks feature, so they will be on high. Ambient occlusion will be on HBAO+, anti-aliasing on FXAA, and bloom turn on. And well, my objective once again is to get 60 frames per second, and as you can see, it's very possible to get to that target, but sometimes you get some stutters by just running in the middle of Paris. The first time you attack an enemy, it will just stutter very quickly. I'm not sure why that's happening. That happens even when I use an i7-4790, so it seems to be a problem with the game itself. You'll notice when I'm running that sometimes they will stutter. That's kind of annoying, to be honest, but apart from that, the game is playable. When your play session starts, the game will be just a stuttering mess in some places when you're moving fast, but as long as you keep playing in that same session, the game will stutter less and less.
Exactly what are you accusing me?
Now CSGO, I'll be doing 1080p once again, using the highest setting possible, with 2 times MSAA. I'll be using just this benchmark test, since a lot of people ask me to use this tool. There's smoke, there's explosions, there are a lot of NPCs. You have pretty much every test done here. That's why I thought it was a better way of explaining how the game runs. So you can see what happens when there's a lot of smoke, a lot of NPCs doing animations, open areas, explosions, all that kind of stuff. Just Cause 3, I'll be doing once again 1080p with the highest setting except motion blur, since in this game it's quite annoying, at least for me. I just turned that off. And as you'll see, I'll just be flying around in the map. I'll just land in the beginning, blow up a couple gas stations, then fly out a little more, kill a bunch of enemies. And you'll see that the game is not perfect, especially when there are explosions involved. When there's an explosion of a gas station, the game can drop below 60 frames per second. Honestly, it's not that bad. In those cases, it drops as low as 50 frames per second. But when flying fast through the map, the game can just stutter randomly. I'm not sure what's going on with that. A lot of people tell me it's the RAM. But as you can see, the game is using 7 GB of my physical RAM, which doesn't seem to be the issue. I tried this with the i7-4790 and the game had no issues using 8 GB of RAM. But yeah, so far it's a playable game. It stutters every now and then, but it's still totally playable. I just recommend to cap it at 50 to 60 frames per second, something like that, so the game is more stable and those stutters happen less. But yeah, I was quite impressed. The game is running quite good.
On the following coordinates.
No good.
Now we got Watch Dogs 2. I'm using pretty much a mix between high and very high, with some stuff lowered. You can see that in the video itself. I'll be also using temporal filtering, so we are using a low resolution and we get a higher frame rate. Temporal filtering is pretty much checkerboarding, so we're using a lower resolution than 1080p. That makes the game a little blurrier. Some people say it's very blurry, but I disagree. The game looks quite good for being just an upscaled image from a low resolution than 1080p, and the performance is much better. But I saw a lot of drops below 60 frames per second, especially while driving fast in the city area. There's not much that we can do about it other than cap the game at 60 frames per second and hope for the best. And I also recommend using more RAM. This game sometimes gets over the 8 GB limit. It's still playable, but it can be quite a stuttery mess every now and then.
Look out! Grenade! Jesus Christ! Officer down!
Rise of the Tomb Raider, I'll be using DirectX 12, exclusive full screen turn on, and 1080p. I'll be using pretty much a mix between medium and high in order to get 60 frames per second, or close to that. I'll be going into the village, which is one of the most CPU intensive parts of this game, as far as I'm concerned. And you'll see that the game is tested over 60 frames per second with some drops as low as 50, but those are very brief. So far it's tested over 60 frames per second most of the time. And I used DirectX 12 since on DirectX 11 I had some performance issues, some very rough drops below 60, which were quite annoying. But if you want to just play it on your PC and get the best performance, try both APIs and see which one works best on your rig.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcoming.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work would go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can do. They will likely come from the
Forza Horizon 3 with the latest update. I'll be using 1080p, and as you can see there's a new option called threaded optimization. What that does is just takes advantage of the extra threads of your CPU. I wasn't able to get 60 frames per second using the GTX 1060 on this game on a mix between medium and high. Now as you can see I'm using a mix between high and ultra, and I'll be just driving into the city, which is the place that I had the most performance issues with a lot of racers on screen and driving as fast as I can. And well, as you can see I'm all the time over 60 frames per second. I didn't see a single drop below that target in the city area with many cars on screen, so I'm I'm very happy to see how well this game now performs compared with the previous patch. That CPU optimization patch was pretty good, it seems. It takes advantage of the extra threads of the CPU instead of focusing on a single one, so we don't get low GPU usage. So yeah, I'm happy to report that this game runs much better. And finally Doom, I'll be using 1080p with the maximum settings and TSS AA 80X. You'll see that shadows are on nightmare and textures are also on nightmare, so we're using the maximum possible settings. You'll see at the beginning of the footage that I will drop below 60 frames per second to around 53, but that was a very brief moment. Outside of that small area, we get pretty much over 60 frames per second without an issue. I'm also using the Vulkan API, and to see the frame rate, I'm using the in-game performance stats tool. So you can see the frame rate plus the frame times directly from the engine, so it's the most accurate thing. So well, conclusion, yes, this is a good PC to game, at least in my opinion. You can always overclock your Ryzen 5 1400, you'll be getting better frame rates on CPU intensive games like GTA 5 and all that kind of stuff. On many games it can get lower frame rates than the i5, but if you also do video editing like I do, you get very similar performance in gaming compared with a locked i5. So seeing it from that way, you get decent gaming performance plus great video editing performance. So I think that it's better value personally. Many games can get to 60 frames per second, but some games like Hitman and Fallout 4, I was a little disappointed since I wasn't able to get 60s. We can still be very close to that target, don't get me wrong, but I was expecting more in those two games for 4 cores and 8 threads. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to help support the channel using Patreon, there's a link down in the description, and see you next time.